Good day, ladies and gentlemen. The review, the discussion, the retrospective all have the innate bias of the individual taking a look at whatever it is, or talking about whatever subject it might or might not be. You gotta be your own person. You've got to be an individual. You shouldn't appropriate someone else's opinion to look cool. You shouldn't hate on something because you want to fit in. And you certainly shouldn't think a certain way just because everyone else does. Ladies and gentlemen, Wolfenstein 2009 was a game that fell victim to bias. It was a game that fell victim to the oh-so-enjoyable Schadenfreude. People said it was the worst Wolfenstein game ever made, despite not ever playing it. Many people, myself included, appropriated negative opinions without actually checking to see if the game was good. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a look at the most hated game that gave players everything they wanted. Today, we're looking at Wolfenstein 2009.
Wolfenstein 2009 was, as you would get from the title, released in 2009 and was developed by the mighty Raven Software and published by Activision. I was one of those people that hated on Wolf 2009, and I hated on it after playing a grand total of one level. Have a listen to the ignorance of youth.
Unfortunately, in 2009, Wolfenstein would reach its lowest point. You can really tell that the cod monster has mauled the legendary B.J. Blazkowicz. What the hell was I on? Oh yeah, arrogance and self-satisfaction.
And thus I could judge an entire bloody game based upon that one bloody level. What's worse is that level's pretty good, and what's worse still is that I hated on the game for one really dumb reason.
Regenerative health, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, and calling it Wolfenstein? Yeah, that didn't help matters either.
I judged the game as bad because it had one mechanic that I didn't like. I dismissed great combat, amazing levels, and a great selection of guns because of one shitty mechanic. You know, I heard of the ignorance of youth, but that's really saying something. Wolfenstein 2009 is a first-person shooter of the highest order. Yeah, it's got the crappy regen health, but then Halo 2 started it, and for some reason people love that game despite it. The following Halo 2 disparagement has been cut for time and censorship purposes. Please enjoy your regular state-approved General Lotz. Moving on from praising how great Halo 2 is, despite the regenerating health, the game features all the great aspects of first-person shooting, without it being a throwback or a boomer shooter. And dare I say that if it had not had the regenerating health, this game would have been considered a modern classic. You have all the great elements of classic shooters, such as diverse weapons and the ability to carry the entire arsenal on your person at any one time. The levels are not thrice bloody damned arenas, and you have an excellent variety of enemies to fight, ranging from the humble lancer to the unidentified flying bastard. You have mini-bosses that require you to use certain tactics to take down, and the boss fights. Oh, by the great space dragon, the boss fights require you to master the game to beat them and are not just a helo chopper or a turret section.
Welp, it's already defeated Duke Nukem Forever for all time. But guess which game isn't on Steam? So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at the weapons.
You start the game with the gun star of World War II, the Machine Pistola 40, a sub-gun of the highest price and order. This will be the staple weapon of the game, and Willie Joe is psychotically attached to this weapon for some reason, despite having an armory of the highest caliber. You have an MP44, and yet while facing big bastards, he will always have this bloody thing out with the stock stowed for extra cool factor. Billy, you might look cool with it, but seriously, at least use a car when facing the big guys, would you? The Car 98K thankfully shows up, and it is glorious. Not only does it sound really sexy, the enemies use it, which is way more historically accurate than them all having MP40s. The Krauts only made 1 million of the things and stopped churning them out before war's end due to them being inferior to a rifle. The car can take heads clean off, and it'll be good for the big guys.
And I got one. Isn't it beautiful? Has nothing to do with the review, but sometimes you just gotta flex.
The Gibbs are here, and they are absolutely psychotically enjoyable. As we would all expect, provided we all watch Gun Jesus, which you should, the best weapon in the game is the STG-44, the first practical assault rifle, and it's a bloody assault rifle since it is a Class 3 firearm, meaning it is select fire. Unless it's select fire, it's not an assault rifle, it's just a semi-auto rifle. You will wreck all with this mighty firearm, and the only issue you will have with it is the same issue that the Krauts had: limited ammo. You got a Flammenwerfer, and it cleanses the heretics with holy fire, and it's rather fun in certain circumstances, but it is best to stick with the longer ranged weapons, since your enemies shoot back. Your rocket launcher is the Panzerschreck, a Kraut copy of the bazooka rocket launcher. It is quite useful for the biggies and for groups of enemies. You then got the Jetpack Hitler weapons. The particle cannon is a phase plasma pulse weapon that is a bounty of the machine god and allows for the vaporization of enemies, but has limited range and a long charge up, meaning its use is somewhat limited. The Tesla cannon returns from Return to Castle and is good at times, but will often gather dust. And then finally you have the BFG of the game, the Leichenfaust 44. This weapon will be good for some of the bigger enemies and some of the bosses, but for most of the game, Hokey Religion's an experimental weapons are no match for a good MP44 at your side, kid. Each weapon can be upgraded, and these upgrades can be purchased from the black market. The gold in this game serves a purpose, as you will need to collect a lot of it to buy upgrades at the black market. And would you believe it, the black market has a plot line. Raven Software, you are too good for this horrid world. The upgrades are kind of silly, such as the one where you upgrade the car with stripper clip guides.
Yeah, the K98K not having stripper clip guides really made me hate the game even more, but that's just part of the weapon upgrade system. There's no reason to get mad about that. It's kind of dumb, but whatever. One thing to point out, though, is the only German rifle to have brazed-on stripper clip guides was the Commission Rifle 1888/15 that the Germans gave the Turks.
And if you think that's bad, the other weapon upgrades are even more nonsensical in comparison, such as the Panzerschreck. It is normally a single-shot rocket launcher, but with the judicious application of gold, you can turn it into a magazine-fed rocket launcher. Where they got the magazines, where they got the place to put the magazines, that's better left unsaid. In fact, you might as well just repeat to yourself, it's just a game, you should probably just relax.
The game also introduces magic! Elminster Blaskowitz? Wait a minute, he hasn't turned himself into a chick yet.
Genderbender elements aside, you get the Thule medallion that allows you to use Veil powers. If we look at Wolfenstein 2009 as a sequel of sorts to the other latter-day id Software games, then the Veil powers are the penultimate version of the powers seen in the other Doom 3 engine games. In Doom 3, you had the Soul Cube that helped with the Killy, and in Resurrection of Evil, you had the Hellheart of Illumined Scorn that gave you various abilities. And here, you have all the goodness of the Hellheart, but now it's more fully implemented into the gameplay. The Thule, or Americanized,
or awesomized. You know, I could have put on some sort of, patriotic music, could have an American flag in the background, but as a lazy American, I just can't be arsed to do it.
Thule medallion gives Billy Joe the ability to slow down time, run faster and walk through walls, project a shield, and supercharge his shooters. Most of the time, I only use the run-in and slow-down powers, as your bullet shooters are powerful enough that you don't really need the other powers to make up for the enemy difficulty. This medallion makes the game really bloody fun. Slow-mowing and shouting "wah" and wading into hapless lancers and then mailing the shit out of them is one of the most atavistic things I've done in a modernist shooter. Doom 2016 tries this with the glory kill system, but that bloody thing is so canned that after a while its novelty wears off, and compared to this, you can see the modernness of the glory kill system under its veneer of freedom. And that's really what this game gives you. freedom. You play through levels the way you want to play through them. You're not artificially forced to do anything, and there are no goddamn arenas. Each level has been meticulously designed by the masters of Raven Software to be both impressive and fun. Just look at this bloody underground base. No arenas, no invisible walls. You get to explore the entire lot of it and slay the Bavarian and not be afraid of anything.
Sorry, Bavaria.
These are the absolute best levels I've played in a modernish game. It has all the great elements of the previous Doom 3 engine games and improves on the level seen in Raven Software's Quake 4. Look at this bloody level. Here, you have to fight it out in a farming area against waves of enemies. You can hide in the farmhouse, or you can fight wherever you want to. You are not forced to snipe here, it's just good tactics. At no time are you forced to play the way the game wants you to. And that freedom allows you to, I don't know, play the game and have gaming memories. And you can have that elusive real fun. The levels are also Raven Software levels through and through, and they require some thought to figure out. Oh sure, they are not like Jedi Knight 2's, but they still require some figuring out here and there.
The game harkens back to the old days of Raven Software by returning to the hub system.
You do not just play through a linear series of levels, instead you have what is a quasi-RPG style of gameplay progression. You have the hub world of Eisenstadt. The local Germans have risen up against their masters and are trying to regain their freedom. And it's up to you to work with them along with a bunch of neckbeards to fight the Germans and stop their fiendish plot of using neckbeard magic to take over the world. You take quests from two factions, the Kreisel Circle and the Neckbeards. They generally are working for the same thing, and there is no influence meter or anything that complex. You just run to and from their headquarters to get missions, and you then run to the mission start zone. To get there, you fight some crowds through the city streets, and sometimes complete an optional mission like rescuing a resistance member, and sometimes you can get a full-on side quest while exploring the city. The between mission cooldown is a very important aspect of the game. If it was just all combat all the time, or just level after level, the game would eventually get boring. But by giving you the time to take a breather and walk around, the game avoids combat tedium. Machine Games took notice of this concept and incorporated the between mission cooldown concept in both New Order and New Colossus. The overall gameplay experience for Wolfenstein 2009 blows every game in 2009 out of the proverbial water, and due to the sheer amount of freedom, blows more modern games out of the water as well.
As the last of the Doom 3 engine games, Wolfenstein 2009 more than stands the test of time.
This is a game from 2009. A game from 12 years ago as of this recording. Just how many games look this bloody good after that many years? The level textures, weapon models, and enemies all look amazing. The graphical effects are also top tier even now. The only thing lacking are the close-up facial models, and the lip syncing is, it's not quite anime level, but it's getting close. And in all reality, the Doom 3 engine always had issues with getting the faces looking 100% right. Even with that in mind, though, the Doom 3 engine is without a doubt one of the most future-proofed engines, at least in terms of graphical fidelity. The footage we're taking a look at here is from my Wolfenstein 2009 live stream, and like with AVP, if you play the game, you won't have the mighty general watching over you, but the game will look a whole lot better than it does here. I played the game in 2K, and it worked well in that screen resolution, with little to no graphical pop-in. I had no frame rate issues and zero crashes to desktop. The game controlled well with the Xbox 360 gamepad, and the checkpoints were never too terrible. Despite being a game from 2009, the PC port has more than stood the test of time. This game's sound design is top tier as well, with the sound effects being about as transcendent as the music. The Car 98K has the aggressive bark that the rifle does in real life, and the jetpack Nazi tech all sound suitably spacey. The VA work could use better polishing, but it's not too cringe to a point. Unlike with the Return to Castle, you get audio when you pick up notes and things of that nature. If you pick up enough, you can unlock upgrades, so you should always seek them out. But the VA work on these is just lackluster, with the German accents being about as good as mine, which is to say, Scheiße. Wolfenstein 2009 probably also pissed off a few people because BJ was finally voiced, and he was voiced by Peter Jessup, and old Pete does a pretty good job as the BJ. His voice sounds suitably heroic, and he sounds about like what you'd figure BJ would sound like. And so here, of course, is the inevitable comparison between Peter Jessup and Brian Bloom. Brian Bloom voiced BJ in Wolfenstein The New Order and The New Colossus and Youngblood. And Brian Bloom brings a new interpretation to the character, one that I personally don't find quite as good as Peter Jessup's. But that just comes from personal preference. Brian Bloom's version of BJ Blazkowicz is a little more harder-edged, a little less purely heroic, whereas Peter Jessup's is more Captain America, although this is a bit ironic, seeing as how Brian Bloom actually voiced Captain America in one of the innumerable Avengers TV series, and actually did a surprisingly good job at that. But at the end of the day, which voice do you like? Well, let me know in the comments. Music for the game is groin-grabbingly transcendent. Instead of the Tarantino-esque music of New Order and New Colossus, you instead have music that is more tonally consistent with music from Return to Castle. Wolfenstein 2009 had its music composed by Bill Brown, who also composed Return to Castle's music as well, and by sticking with the same style, this gives the game a shared identity with the previous game, and by doing that, gives Wolfenstein as a whole a music identity of its own. This is music that won't beat you over the head with epicness, but instead is so good that you will start picking up on some of the best tracks just through normal gameplay, and is music good enough to listen to outside of the game.
The story for Wolfenstein 2009, while not as polished as New Order's, still is an order of magnitude more complex, and is more like a TV show compared to Wolfenstein New Order's cinematic experience.
Wolfenstein 2009 picks up sometime after Return to Castle Wolfenstein, and despite the 8 years between games, there has been no soft reboot. Rather, the game starts up showing an epic battle between Willie Joe and the Nat Sox. This is entirely historically inaccurate and suicidal for the Nat Sox. They are trying to launch some missiles from a ship in 1945. By the time this game takes place, there would have been so many planes headed to that ship that they would have been waiting in line to bomb it. But Billy Joe gets to kick the crap out of some Sox. But seriously, BJ, you could at least carry, high power. At least then all those shots would be somewhat plausible. In this cutscene, we first see the Thule amulet in action. However, it never does this again. Sadly, this opener was likely nail one in the coffin for this game, as old school Wolf fans like myself would have used it as an example of why the game strayed from its roots. But I gotta tell you, this is a fucking awesome cutscene. You see BJ BJing it up like he never has before, and really, looking at it now from the lofty perch of 2021, this is an epic way to open a game if you can't just have the player get immediately into the gameplay. After the epicness of the opening cutscene, you cut to another cutscene that lays out the plot of the game. You meet up with the two OSA guys from Return to Castle Wolfenstein, and they lay out your objective. You have to stop the evil General Zeta from exploiting a magic artifact that will somehow allow the Nat Sox to win the war!
Now, I'm going to finally talk about, after all these years, the origins of the Blazkowicz name.
William Joseph Blazkowicz shares the same last name as Johann Albrecht Blazkowicz, a German general that fought in the Polish campaign. He, unlike many of his fellows, refused to engage in war crimes, and even brought SS men up on charges and even gave a few the death penalty. This, of course, angered old Addy, and Addy sacked him. Addy would go on to say that they're not running a Salvation Army, and he would also call Blazkowicz childish. This is a very interesting case of a German general actually acting virtuously. Blazkowicz would die in 1948, and his death is disputed. Some say he killed himself, and some say he was killed by the SS. I would really like to see a Mark Felton video lay this mystery to rest. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I promise you we'll get into the game proper in just a few more minutes. We gotta take a close look at the version of BJ Blazkowicz present in this game. This version of BJ is a continuation of the BJ scene in Return to Castle Wolfenstein. He is a more jovial sort of hero. He is essentially Colonel Hogan, but, well, instead of necking the ladies, he's necking the Nazis. This stands in contrast to the more harder-edged and more psychotic version seen in the Machine Games timeline. Both versions are perfectly valid, and both versions are very good characters in general, but I happen to prefer this version as I happen to be more fond of the classical style of hero versus the more rougher-edged version seen these days. With all that, let's finally get into the bloody game. The story starts up with you riding into Eisenstadt on a train, Half-Life style. The following joke at Half-Life's expense has been censored by the YouTube censorship board. Please enjoy more general odds already in progress. Your cover gets blown the second you arrive, and before you know it, you get an MP40 and do just one thing, and that's ridding the world of censored. This first battle is an excellent hook for the player. The train station shootouts occur from all distances and last long enough for the player to really get stuck in. There are a few minor objectives to complete, and you can find hidden gold throughout, and this level, along with others, is large enough for you to legitimately explore. During this opener mission, you don't have your Thule amulet yet, but you do get introduced to German blue magic juice. Ooh, Germany, what's wrong with just regular sexy time? Why do you have to go and make it weird? Anyway, you encounter a train filled with fetish fuel and it explodes and distorts the local gravimetric field, aka everything gets weightless, and the Germans become even easier to shoot down. And from this level on, you will have the ability to destroy barrels filled with fetish fuel in order to disorient guards. You fight your way out of the train station and into the game proper. You link up with the Kreisau Circle and meet Caroline Becker. She's the leader of the Kreisau Circle and will return in Wolfenstein: The New Order. And despite it being set in 1960, she is still just as hot in 1960 as she is in 1945. Your first mission is to investigate a German dig site, Indiana Jones style. When you arrive at the dig site, you meet up with a random Russian neckbeard that somehow survived the trip from the Soviet Union to Germany without getting shot. Now that required some magic. He already knows who BJ is and what his mission is as well. He charges BJ with finding the Thule amulet located at the dig site. The amulet used at the beginning of the game is likely left with the Ark of the Covenant. You eventually meet back up with the random Russian neckbeard, and he gives you a Noxzone crystal to charge up the amulet with. You get the amulet charged up, and you're ready to rock and roll. And you then have to use what you have learned. Help you it can, for Raven Software believes in making games. And so after getting the Thule amulet charged up, you have to complete some challenges to progress. Like you will do many times in this game, BJ rigs the place to blow and escapes in a convenient truck. The game varies its levels. There are some modest ones set in a single building, and there are some massive battles. The game also paces its story fairly well, and doesn't spoil the entire bloody thing in level 1. After getting the amulet, BJ learns that he can channel Black Sun Dimension energy, and that in Eisenstadt there are all sorts of pools that exist to refill his energy bar. His mission now is to stop the Natsocks from getting themselves nuked off the face of the earth, because no amount of Black Sun energy will give them—
Just repeat to yourself, it's just magic. You should really just relax.
And even then, what about the manpower shortage? Are they just going to get magic Your next mission is to investigate a church. To get there, you have to engage in an epic battle, and the Germans are smart and use the fetish fuel as a shield for their MG42s. Block that, you bastard. You fight to the church through some truly excellent fights and then engage in the first boss fight of the game. Skeletor shows up and you shove an MP40 up his ass. Almost literally. BJ, my dude, why in the name of Smizer are you getting that close to the obviously mutating bastard? You know, why not just back up a bit and, you know, shoot him? After killing the Skeletor, you can then choose between continuing missions with the Kreisau Circle or helping some of the neckbeards. Their mission is to check out a farm after some of their nerd patrol went missing.
Sounds simple enough, right? Raven Software, you were too good for this benighted world.
You meet a neckbeard in a pub named after Raven Software and meet the game's final boss, Hans, Raven Software loves Indiana Jones as much as we do. Grosse. He is a roided up lout and talks about some sort of Nazi army. He must be a super political SS bastard then, because the German army is what a real German soldier would be talking about, but whatever. Grosse punches out an idiot that complained about the Krauts. In real life, that guy would have just been shot. So yeah, that gets onto the subject of the game's Natsocks. The game uses the Indiana Jones style of National Socialists. They are tough foes, but blinded by their own arrogance and cruelty, and this concept extends all the way to the game's primary villains. The game starts up with General Zeta being the main antagonist. He is a fat bastard that bullies his men and does more damage to his side than you do, but he is still entertainingly bad in a good old-fashioned pulp sort of way. The farm level is by far my favorite level in the entire game. The farm firefights are positively orgasmic, and then, surprise, onto the farm you have a giant fuck-off secret lab, and yeah, this is Raven Software. You fight through the entire bloody level. Everything you see, you go to, and it's not just arenas every 5 feet. You find the Natsocks are mutating humans to create an army of gimps to terrorize the wholesome allies with. The fights are epic, and the outro even more so. You and a member of the Geek Squad escape the exploding Natsock base on a train, and BJ has to hold off the gimp army with an MG-42.
Now remember, ladies and gentlemen, not on Steam.
Don't forget, lads and lasses, you can choose which order you want to do some of the missions in. So I chose the farm level because I wanted to get what I thought was a side quest out of the way. I hadn't been so surprised by a level since the old Oblivion days where I modded in Duke City and met Captain Picard. I could have chose the hospital level instead. This level has you fighting super gimp Natsocks that love to cloak and then molest your sweet flesh. Hence why the best way to show your displeasure is to shove a rocket right up their ass. They are German, so they probably enjoy it. The level is suitably creepy and culminates in the old boss bullfight. A German scientist gets thrown into a hell portal and then mutated into a chaos spawn, and you aggro it so that it runs into these pillars until it brings the entire dark Stargate crashing onto itself. You then go on to fuck up some more Scheisse and then come face to face with the fat force of General Zeta, and oh my god, what is he doing? Raven, what were you smoking when you programmed the fat, ugly Zeta model to do this? I mean, don't tell me it was chicken, because I've had smoked chicken, and it doesn't make me want to program something like that. It takes what should be a scary boss fight and turns it into a joke. You have to use your magic to see that Zeta has been possessed by a sound marine of Slanesh. This is the first of the puzzle boss fights. You have to shoot these big blue tanks to whittle down the power of Michael Jackson and put paid to the fat bastard once and for all.
And then after the porcine Zeta fell, BJ felt a disturbance in the Thule.
Old Death's Head is back and up to his old tricks yet again. Another old friend has returned from Return to Castle Wolfenstein as well, the Dominatrixes. They've traded in their silent stins for magic. You better have a quick trigger finger to avoid being pegged by these sultry villains. Your next big mission is one where you storm Slosh Adler.
Only OG fans will get that reference.
You really battle to Castle Wolfenstein. And I gotta say, this is one of the top tier first-person shooter battles of all time, and the single greatest battle in Castle Wolfenstein. Oh sure, some of the games will have better graphics and super epic cutscenes, but here, laddies and lasses, you get to play the whole thing and make it epic due to your actions. The battle culminates in an epic showdown with that natter Death's Head. He gloats, he talks of revenge, and then Hans Roidze shows up with a captured Caroline Becker. If you don't talk to the various people in the game, you will never know how she was captured. Turns out, it was one of the black market guys that sold her out. And sadly, here, Caroline Becker catches a bullet in the side, but she survives this attack, but unfortunately has to defecate in a bag for 20 years. You then have a rock-off with the devil, or at least the devil's ugly dominatrix sister. The boss fight also shows that Raven Software was too good for this world, as it's not only a puzzle boss fight, it is a turret section that manages to be fun. Saints be praised, it's a miracle. You have to use your Korban power to make your AK gun bullets better for maximum killing justice. Just when you think that chick is toast, you have another fight, and you give her BJ's big fucking gun to the face, and finally, that bitch is toast.
So you would think the game's over. The credits are gonna roll, and that's it. There's no possible way that Raven Software could top themselves. Not on Steam.
The cowardly bastard Death's Head was able to escape the battle, and now it is up to you to get revengeance for Caroline's hotness. You do battle against a few more Natsocks and a regular dominatrix that thinks she can punish BJ by jumping into a boss fight machine. A few well-placed BJ spikes shows her the error of her ways. And then, ladies and gentlemen, the game's final level, my second favorite, has you take to the skies and fight on Death's Head's battle zeppelin. And it is glorious. Great firefights with just a hint of platforming. You finally get to rock off with the original first-person shooter devil himself, Hans Grosse. You get sucked into the Black Sun dimension and fight against the Roid Machine, and he is sporting some truly spiffy 40k-esque battle plate. This is my second favorite boss fight in the game. It's rather hard to top the Devil's ugly dominatrix sister after all. It's a puzzle boss fight that will take a little bit of time to figure out, and the arena is thankfully not just a tiny circular patch of ground. Instead, Hans pussies out and runs away like a little bitch. But BJ always gets his busted, and the roided up bastard himself is finally eliminated once and for all. And the game ends with BJ crushing the Thule amulet and walking off to fight another day.
To quote, "We're not worthy! We're not worthy!"
Scarcely have I ever felt this bad about a game not getting popular. Raven Software did everything right to make a good game, and yet it came at the absolute wrong time. It was too modern for old schoolers to give it the time of day, and too classic for the COD boys to take an interest.
How might Wolfenstein 2009 fit within the Machine Games continuity? Well, better than you might think.
Wolfenstein: The New Order does work as a direct sequel to Wolfenstein 2009. You have Caroline Becker and Death's Head returning, and Caroline Becker even references the events that take place prior to the rock-off with the Devil's ugly sister. The Thule amulet can explain why BJ grew so bloody huge, and why he didn't atrophy after getting shrapnel to the conch and spending 20 years in the loony bin. And the mind-bending elements of the amulet possibly altered his mental state as well. And here's a bit of wolf theory. What if the world that BJ was spat out into at the end of the game wasn't his own, but instead the Machine Games German victory timeline? Or better yet, what if an alternate Death's Head used a hidden source of Black Sun energy to change the timeline elsewhere? This can actually explain the super tech found in the Machine Games timeline. And with time travel, we can possibly have a different World War II from the outset, and thus give the Sox the best possible chance for victory. Still doesn't explain where Addy got all those extra Germans, though. Having played the game from start to finish, I have determined that this is both an Alpha Prime game and my second favorite Wolfenstein sequel, with Return to Castle still being the first. This game is everything I wanted, but I just was too blind back in 2009 to see it.
Since the primordial days of 2009, I, the mighty general, have recommended to you many games. Some obscure, some less so. And greatest of them all, greatest of the forgotten games, greatest of the hated games, is Wolfenstein 2009. It is a game that deserves to be played. Find it where you can. For now, I am General Lotz, and I'm going to wish you good Rampage, and good Rampage World Tour, whatever makes you happy.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue bringing you this great content.